from the mimbar. There's no doubt that you should teach Tahawiyah. Tahawiyah, even the Salafis, Wahhabis appreciate. It's the one book that the Ummah recognizes ijma'an. Ijma'an, Imam Tahawi's Aqidah Tahawiyah is maqbool. Indal kul. Everybody says you should teach from the mimbar. That should be one of your plans and one of the things that you do as a community of ulama. Everybody should teach Tahawiyah. It's quite simple. Simplify it even more. You don't need to get into too many discussions of Khalqul Quran and all of that. You can just teach it sardan, and the masail are there. But that is Aqidatul Najat, and in my opinion, is Fard Ayn. And you must teach it the way it should be taught to the awam, and so on. In our history, Aqidah was the first discipline to be organized. The first discipline, but it was organized through what we call at Dar al-Qasim, we have a theory, oral tradition, and not the written tradition, which is another historic fact you should know as ulama. In the Khair al-Qurun, we didn't use books to learn and teach, because our Nabi is a Nabi al-Ummi, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He never used books to learn and teach. He never had anything written. The Sahaba wrote the Quran, Abu Bakr then compiled it, and Uthman then recompiled it, but that was now a formal, official, government level documentation. That's why they documented and they wrote it formally. But the formal letters of the Prophet ﷺ, the formal letters of Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali, they were government level documents. They were legal documents. They were qanuni documents. So in that sense of the qanun, you can write. فَاكْتُبُوهُ صَغِيرًا كَانَ أَوْ كَبِيرًا. So that's because it's a document. Right? It's a legal transaction, you have to document it. So writing was for documentation. Writing was not for learning and teaching. Right? So that's why the Sahaba and the Tabi'in, they didn't use books. And that's the reason why we don't have books. In that zaman, خَيْرُ الْقُرُونِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. You follow the Prophet ﷺ in his ummiyah. That's the oral tradition where deen was preserved. Everybody understood the deen through, personal suhbah, heart to heart communication, but there was no textbook. In that period, we had the discussion of Aqidah, where the Khawarij came, as you know the story, in al-hukm illa lillah. And they used that as a slogan, and Ali radiallahu anhu said, Kalimat haqqin urida biha al-batil. That was the first now bid'ah that came into the ummah, that you are making ta'wil of an ayah of the Quran, or you're not making ta'wil in that case. And then the Mu'tazili came afterwards, and then all of this fitan came and all of that. So Aqidah was now so critical to the development of the ummah's point of view in terms of siyasi ikhtilaf. So Ali and Muawiyah had a siyasi ikhtilaf. Neither Ali nor Muawiyah said, we want a new deen. Did any of them say that? No. See, it was not a revolution about ideas and ideology and theology. When the Christian Reformation, there was fights about ideology and all of that. So in the Muslims, Ali and Muawiyah both said, this is the same deen. We're not fighting about the deen. We're not fighting about Aqidah. This is a siyasi issue, whether we should go after the assassins of Uthman or not. So in siyasat, everything's good. So you can't condemn somebody as a kafir if they have a siyasi ikhtilaf. That is what the Sahaba taught the ummah. That, look at this, we're even killing each other. Even that does not allow you to say somebody is a kafir. So they preserved the aqidah of the deen by saying, these ikhtilaf, they're not something that we can't accommodate. Now, it's not good that you fight and you don't have unity. That's not good either. But it's not a reason to call somebody a kafir. So the Khawarij came and they called them kafirs. Ali and Muawiyah they condemn as kafir. Uthman is also kafir. The only two people they like was Abu Bakr and Umar. They're on one extreme. And the other extreme are the Shias who condemn everybody except Ali. Right? So now we have sandwich in between the Khawarij and the Shias. But the Sahaba preserved the deen. And the Tabi'in preserved the deen in the sense that this is our Aqidah. So Aqidah is there. And during the time of Abu Hanifa, Aqidah was still there. What happened was that then, because of our engagement with the Mu'tazila, we needed to develop an understanding of how they thought and what were their arguments, what were their positions. So we need to learn their language. Their language was heavily borrowed from the Greeks, and they developed a language of ilm al-kalam, and so on. So that's how the kalam issue came. So it's very simple to understand. You know, in Abu Hanifa's fiqh, his fiqh is based on the sunnah. It's not based on hadith. You must understand this point. Abu Hanifa's fiqh is based on the sunnah. Sunnah is what? What the community practices. Which community? As I mentioned yesterday, about the majhul. Majhul in the ulama, in the muhaddithin, not majhul in the nas. Okay? So now, in the community of ulama, this amal is accepted as part of deen. And in the community of ulama, this amal is not accepted as part of deen. That's the sunnah. That's called the living sunnah. That's what people call the praxis. The practice. And all that. So Abu Hanifa's fiqh is in the athar of the Sahaba. It's not necessarily based on the sanad of the hadith going back to the Prophet. Some of it obviously is. Most of it, if you read Imam Muhammad's Kitab al-Athar and Al-Hujjah ala Ahli Madinah, then you'll find that this is the truth about the Hanafi madhab, that we looked at the total understanding of the ulama about this issue, not just one hadith. So it was more critical and much deeper and broader than what Imam Shafi brought to the table later on. Imam Shafi's position, if the hadith is sahih, you have to act on it. We say no. We will evaluate the hadith which is sahih sanadan in the context of the sunnah. Has this hadith been accepted by the ulama or not as a practice? Not as a hadith, as an amal. So Abu Yusuf's letter to Awza'i brings this out. So if you read Abu Yusuf's letter to Imam Awza'i, he says, you are quoting hadith that the community does not practice. And if this is a hadith that you say is known, then who in your community knows this hadith? Even though you have a sanad to it. Yeah? But you can't mention this to the awam. They say, you say you don't follow hadith. Their minds, they're not there. You studied, alhamdulillah, usul hadith, usul tafsir, and aqidah and all that good stuff. So you know the language. Right? So if when somebody says hadith da'if, so somebody who doesn't know hadith at all, he'll say, this is slander. This is almost kufr. How can you say hadith is da'if? You must be crazy to say the Prophet mentioned hadith da'if. He said, no, that's not what it means. What hadith da'if means is the sanad is da'if, not the matan. Right? That's why you must separate the ilm from popular Islam. So that's why the problem with the Salafis, they had the hadith da'if. Al-hadith laysa ad'af mink. Al-hadith laysa ad'af minka. You understand? Why do we keep the da'if hadith? It's an academic discipline. It's called ilm. It's not meant to be shared in public. Like, hada hadith da'if. Yeah. So now, when you have terminologies for discipline, you have istilahat, And the mustalahat can only be understood by the people who study the field, not the awam. Okay, so now Abu Hanifa's position is that, is this practice in the ummah or not? Is this accepted, number one? Number two, is there evidence that is strong enough to say it is fard, wajib, sunnah, makruh, tahrimi, tanzih? If there's no evidence, then he measures everything according to the weight of the evidence. In terms of sanad and matan, context also matters to Abu Hanifa a lot. Like Imam Malik, the context matters. The first two, they were very critical in evaluating every hadith. Imam Malik says in Muwatta, هذا الحديث لا نعمل عليه. He says in Muwatta, هذا الحديث لا نعمل به, we don't act on this hadith. So you're quoting the hadith, why aren't you acting on it? Yeah, so if an army went and read the translation of Imam Malik's Muwatta and said, this is a hadith, we don't act on it, so what kind of Muslim is he? He's not acting on hadith. So popular Islam does not belong here in the madrasa. You understand what I'm saying? Because that mindset doesn't allow you to develop as a scholar. Yeah. So this is now scholarship. So Aqidah now is first and Kalam is second. Sunnah is first and Hadith is what? Second. From all the disciplines, mashallah, Hadith was collected and formulated almost the last. The muhaddithin, they took care of the hadith only after the four madhahib were established. Imam Bukhari is Imam Ahmad's student. Right? So if you say that Abu Hanifa should follow Imam Bukhari, do you live in some kind of alternative universe where Abu Hanifa, who came earlier, should follow Imam Bukhari, who came 100 years later? So unless you're Sufi, I can go back in time or go forward in time and follow Imam Bukhari. Why does Abu Hanifa need to follow Imam Bukhari? He came earlier. His access to knowledge is much more pure and much more clearer than Imam Bukhari's access to knowledge. So we have to be careful there. That although Bukhari is great, alhamdulillah, we always have Khatam Bukhari, is the event of the year for every madrasa. But it's not at the expense of Abu Hanifa's understanding of the deen. Right? So Abu Hanifa is with the Sunnah, Imam Bukhari is with the Hadith. So Hadith developed after the Sunnah. Likewise, Ilmul Kalam came to defend the Aqidah. Why do we need Kalam? So that we can defend the Aqidah. Not that we can prove the Aqidah through Ilmul Kalam. It's already established. The Aqidah there's no ijtihad in Aqidah. And there's no taqleed in Aqidah. Aqidah is pure Quran, Sunnah is pure Wahi, is just from the Nas. If you don't have a Nas, then you can't formulate an opinion in Aqidah. So Aqidah is something that is very, you have to say Amanna and Aslamna. So that's why you have the issue of Tafweed and Taslim in Aqaidah. Tafweed and Taslim, which is what the Aslaf did from the time of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and so on. So the Sahaba did not ask the Prophet ﷺ, Ma ma'na yadullah. There's not a single riwayah which says they asked this question. Ma ma'na ar-Rahman ala al-arsh istawa, ma ma'na al-Fawqiyah. They didn't ask this question. Because Amanna, Aslamna, Fawwadna al-Amr ila Allah Ta'ala. And there was, Imam Malik said, was Sawalu anhu bid'ah. You can't even ask the question. It's just complete taslim. That Allah is the way He is. Amantu billahi kama huwa. First part. Amantu billahi kama huwa. Bi asma'i wa sifati. Right? There we don't ask questions. It is totally subjective. You make taslim and taqweed and say Amr ila Allah. It is kama yaliqu bi sha'ni. That's the most you can say. كما يليق بشأن is the most you can say. You can't say anything after that. Now what happened was that the bid'at came into the ummah, and the ulama needed to defend the ummah from bid'at, so they developed a language called ilmul kalam so that they could defend the aqidah. That's an academic language. So kalam is different from aqidah as a discipline. So the aqidah is aqidatul najat, where the aqidah I have must be the aqidah of Abu Bakr. Otherwise I don't have najat. Right? The Abu Hanifa statement. So my aqidah and Abu Bakr's aqidah is the same. My iman, Abu Bakr's iman is the same. There's no difference between them because the mu'min alayh has to be the same. Amantu billahi wa malaikati wa kutubi wa rusuli wal yawmil akhir. That iman is the same as Abu Bakr's. Abu Bakr did not have an additional item in his aqidah portfolio than I do. It's the same thing. We have the same assets. We have the same portfolio. The difference is in the amal, the difference in the ikhlas, the difference in kayfiyah, not in the kammiyah. So that aqidah there is not quantifiable, it's qualifiable. So you can't quantify aqidah, but you can qualify it. That one person will have more yaqeen or iman in that sense, al-iman yazid wa yanqus. But in the sense of quantity, that the items are articles of iman that Abu Bakr has are exactly the same as I have. Otherwise, I'm not a believer. It's all or nothing. So if somebody says, I believe in the angels, but I don't believe in the prophets, then he's not a Muslim. So, but he has 99%. He said, 99% is not good enough. It has to be everything, 100%. Every mu'min must be 100% a believer in the aqaid. In that sense, Abu Hanifa's position was very correct because he thought like an usuli, and others didn't think the way Abu Hanifa thought, and they maybe were too harsh in judging Abu Hanifa. They didn't understand the context of what Abu Hanifa was saying. So now this is why, as a necessary tool to defend Islam, you need kalam as a necessary tool. What are the tools of kalam? They are mantiq. So you must know mantiq. They have munadhara, so you must know munadhara. You have ilm al-jidal, so you must know jidal. Dialectics and polemics and all of that good stuff. You must know usul tafsir. So that's all part of ilm al-kalam. So now if you have these tools, then you can be a mutakallim. Then obviously you read the books that the early ulama wrote, and then later ulama also wrote, and the mutaqaddimin, mutaakhirin of ilm al-kalam, and you have Imam Ash'ari who wrote books on ilm al-kalam, and Imam Maturidi has one or two books on his ilm al-kalam, and they had other people later on who came in, and so on. So the ilm al-kalam now is for defensive reasons, to defend the deen. Just as ilmu is ilmu rijal and is ilmu isnad al-hadith is a defensive tool to preserve the hadith. You understand? Yeah. So you need ilmu al-hadith, ilmu usul al-hadith, to preserve the riwayat and make sure that this is sahih and this is saqim, this is sahih and this is da'if, and all of that. So it's to defend the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ from corruption, from bid'ah, and from du'af, and from wada', basically. But there you have to be in hadith studies. Likewise, in order to defend the aqidah, you need kalam. Now, kalam may take on other tools, like contemporary ilm al-kalam may need some extra tools. I don't believe that's true, but say you have atheism, right? Now, how are you going to defend Islam against atheism if you don't have this ilm al-kalam? It's part of ilm al-kalam. You can call it what you want. Then people say, no, you need humanities and you need science, and it's in the toolbox. Right? It's part of the toolbox. It's not germane to the Islamic studies. Understand? Yeah. Meaning, that can you study Islam without ilmul kalam? Yes, you can. Can you defend Islam without ilmul kalam? No, you can't. There's a difference there, right? So to the Salafi point, that can you be a good alim without ilmul kalam? Yes, you can be a wonderful alim without ilmul kalam. Wonderful alim. Can you defend Islam? No. Why? Because you don't think. You're just bone lazy. You don't want to think. And so an atheist comes to you and says, well, I don't do atheism. I say, oh, okay. You don't want to promote Islam. You don't want to defend Islam. You don't want to now say that Islam is the best. And that if you don't say Islam is the best, then, what kind of Muslim are you? So they're lazy. Okay. So when the body becomes sick, you need people to help you make sure that there's medicine there. So that becomes a farad al-kifaya. The ilmul tib becomes farad al-kifaya. That somebody in the community must be there to help people when they're sick. Right? And that's part of the process. That taqween also. فَإِذَا مَرِضْتُ فَهُوَ يَشْفِينِ. So you need somebody who does the shifa, administer the shifa for you. But he also has to be trained. So now there are diseases that corrupt the human mind, and diseases that corrupt the human nafs and soul, which is part of your question too, where the consciousness is the consciousness in the heart or in the mind and so on. We can get to that in a second. But anyway, so what I'm saying is ilmul kalam is a necessary tool to preserve the deen against bid'at al-akhliyah, bid'at fil aqaid, bid'at fil afkar. That's a necessary tool. And if you don't have that, you're not a complete alim in the sense that you can't defend your position. Yeah. So if you're not able to defend your position, you don't have that part of the waratha of the Anbiya. Al-ulama waratha al-Anbiya. All the Anbiya had jidal. All the Anbiya had the power of jidal, as I mentioned last night to you guys. يا نوح قد جادلتنا فأكثرت جدالنا ألم تر إلى الذي حاج إبراهيم في ربه أن آتاه ملكا. Then Allah says about Ibrahim, فبهت الذي كفر. He just bulldozed him, right? He made him nothing, basically. He couldn't say anything in front of Ibrahim. And the Prophet, his ability to debate the Quraysh so many times here and there. Representing Islam now comes with various skill sets. One is tabligh, in the sense that you can represent Islam intellectually to, say, an academic audience here in Canada. And that you go to colleges, universities, and you represent the theory of Islam for them. For us, it's the Aqidah. And then you represent the ihsan of Islam, the beauty of Islam, why Islam is so good, which is what you should do. Rather than defending Islam all the time, say what Islam is. Don't say what Islam isn't. I think one of the more serious problems we have is not Islamophobia. It is xenophobia. People don't know who we are because we never say who we are. Whereas defending, no, Islam is not against women. And that the women, give them a break also. Women say, why are you talking about us? Give yourselves a break from being that passive and reactionary. Islam doesn't say about women, Islam loves women. But if you represent Islam and present the ihsan and beauty of Islam, which we can talk about some other time, and also that the values Islam brings to the human society. Talk about the positive Islam rather than react to the negative statements that media gives you and people in academia give you, the Orientalist and all of that. So I think you should be proactive rather than reactive. Okay. Explain what Islam, that's all you have to do, is explain what Islam is, and people will be fascinated. Just the human interaction value. I mean, these countries are deprived of human interaction. They don't have human interaction. Nobody comes for even Christmas anymore. They send each other a postcard. Now it's just email or Zoom link or whatever. But there's no human interaction. So when a society is deprived of humanness, then you're not really a society, you're a mechanical, robotic society. You should bring that point out. That in Islam we pray in Jamaat all the time. We have human interaction. We go for Jamaat, we have Eid, and then we have now food is something that's very important for the Muslim Ummah, that we invite each other and we have food together. And it's a very important value. Because these people, they don't have that. They have no interaction with each other at all. They're totally deprived. They're just, as I said, they're just robots. So there's no raham there. There's nothing there in their culture that appeals to the human psyche. Right? So what kind of life do you have? Oh, I have to now go. I have to work. I have to go have a drink, or in the weekend, I just make sure I get drunk so I don't need to worry about the problems I have in my life. And if I get married, I'm sure I'll be divorced in 5 years, if not earlier. Right? That's the culture. And you telling me that it's a good culture? I don't think so. So bring out the positive of Islam, Islamic realities, Islamic values, which I call civilizational values, and talk to people in a very polite, kind way, that they actually see, oh, wow, such a wonderful religion, and so on. So anyway, so this now, Ilmul Kalam is necessary, as I'm repeating my statements time and time again, so that you understand our position. Ilmul Kalam is not necessary in order for you to be a good alim. Ilmul Kalam is necessary in order for you to represent Islam and to defend Islam, which is wajib here in this country. You must represent Islam and you must defend Islam against every kind of bid'ah, every kind of distortion, every kind of wrong interpretation, whether be it in the Muslim community or outside the Muslim community. You must be able to respond to the allegations of the Orientalists, and you must be able to, as I said, further the mission of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ. That idhar is idhar ilmi. That قُلْ فَلِلَّهِ الْحُجَّةُ الْبَالِغَةُ. That the hujjah is established intellectually. It must be established. Right? Not just popular Islam. It can't be popular Islam. Right? You have to be careful there. So when the Prophet ﷺ said, "Sallu fi ni'alikum, fa inna al-yahuda la yusalluna fi ni'alim." Does anyone do this? Have you seen any Muslim community that says, "Sallu fi ni'alikum"? The hadith is sahih. Do you practice it? Why do you practice it? Because then you can't bring that into the popular Islam, because everybody will start wearing their shoes in the masjid. And so we don't need to fund the masjid carpet anymore. So we don't need to give them donations now. Sallu fi ni'alikum. No? Khaliful Yahud. فَإِنَّهُمْ لَا يُصَلُّونَ فِي نِعَالِهِمْ. Does anyone practice it? Meaning that it's something that the Prophet ﷺ said, so that Muslims of Medina would not go to the Yahud for any inspiration in their ibadat. That's why he said it. He didn't say it because he wanted to make this now practice. That's why none of the Sahaba did it. You understand? He said the Sahaba didn't act on this hadith, subhanAllah. So that's popular Islam. So what I'm saying is that you must be able to understand the difference between what is Aqidatun Najat, Amalun Najat, and Aqidah, which is based on ilm. The Aqidah that's based on ilm is now Kalami Aqidah. It is Kalami. You must study that, you must know that. And I, as I said, disagree with the idea that you need to add more tools to it. Not necessarily. It's all there. You read just not even Sharia Qaid, just read Aqidah Nasafiyya properly. Everything's there. You just have to think about it. Then I'm not saying don't read Sharia Qaid, which you do, which is good. You must read it. I wouldn't give ijazah to anyone who doesn't read Sharia Qaid. I won't give ijazah to anyone who doesn't read Hujjatullah. Okay? That's my theory. I don't think anybody should be given ijazah here in the West if they haven't read Hujjatullah. It must be read, it must be taught, because that's where you're going to find these usul. You're going to find these gems that Shah Waliullah brings. He's going to give you the big picture of Islam, intellectual big picture. And he came at a time when there was the Enlightenment thinkers in Europe. And then the US was formed based on the Enlightenment thinkers and their theories. And Shah Waliullah's theories, they contradict each other. So Shah Waliullah has already forecasted for the Ummah that this is what you need to think about before you come to a superpower in the West. Because these people, they have a philosophy. In everything they do, they have a philosophy. So you must understand that. Also, Qaida Ibn Rahimahullah used to say that you must understand their history, and you must understand their language, and you must understand their psyche. If you're going to do work in the West, that's what he told us in his majlis in Dilban, mashallah. If you want to work in the West, then you must have three things along with your ilm: the language, the history, and the psyche, which is part of the culture. We must understand that. That's why we at Dar Qasim have something I call Ulum al-Kuffar. I call it Ulum al-Kuffar, Tanzan. ये ठीक है लेकिन ज़रूरी है. You must know kufr to fight it. The Prophet ﷺ knew everything about the tribal system. He knew everything. He knew everything about the tribes. He knew their lughah, he knew their ash'ar. He knew their history, he knew their psyche. That's why he was able to unite them. Right? So you must understand from the Seerah of the Prophet and the Sunnah of the Prophet that you must understand kufr. The kufr changes, as you know, with every country, every context, every century sometimes. And the kufr then either devolves or develops or whatever. Then the kufrun, as Imam Bukhari says, kufrun duna kufrun. Right? It's an amazing jumla he has, kufrun duna kufr. You must think about it, how deep it is. So I'm saying that you can have some humanities and social sciences and all of these alati ulum, but they're not part of the core Islamic studies. People say you must change the syllabus of the madaris. No, you don't. When you study engineering, do you include now, what do you call it, philosophy into it? No. When you're studying Islamic studies, why do you need to include anything else in it? You do Islamic studies. Islamic studies is basically Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, and Fiqh, and Aqidah. That's the four core content of Islamic studies. If you have these four, you have Islamic studies. Then you can't have engineering now plugged into it. Right? You can't have a history. Why don't we have a Seerah? Dars in Nizami, in any Dars in Nizami, whether it's Egyptian or Tunisian or Syrian or Yemeni. We don't have Seerah as an independent subject. It's a new bid'ah. Now people are saying, basically, because you're popularizing Islam, you need to have Seerah for the public schools or for the Muslim schools and the masjid, so now you must have Seerah for the ulama. No, the Seerah is intertwined with the Sunnah. Right? You can't follow everything in Seerah if the Sunnah doesn't confirm it. Right? So if the Prophet did something in his Seerah, Mubarakah, you don't act on it unless the Sunnah says yes. You can follow this point of the Seerah, otherwise it is mansukh. Abu Hanifa's position in every hadith, is it mansukh or not? No, the Prophet may have done that, but then it's mansukh. Or the Sunnah now reforms it, refines it. The best example is the sa'i between Safa and Marwa. It's part of the Seerah of Hajar. Right? She is the one who did that. What does the Sunnah say? Hajar is a woman. Do women do that? Do they run? What does the Sunnah say? Women can't run, but it is a woman who initiated. So if you know this is in the Seerah and I'm going to act on it, you start all women running there. We say that's a bid'ah, but it's in the Seerah. You must have a critical mind. Not everything in the Seerah is there for practice. So there, even though the hadith and the riwayat or sahihah is not part of the amal of the Prophet and the Sahaba. That's Abu Hanifa's point. Right? So now the Sunnah changed it, it refined it, that women will not run even though Hajar is a woman and she ran, But in our sunnah we say, no, men will run, women will not run. So it changes. The sunnah then changes with understanding where the seerah belongs. So it might be okay for the Prophet ﷺ at that time, but it's okay to make this a practice. That is where you get your fiqh. The fiqh will tell you which part of the seerah you apply and which part you don't. The seerah was never seen as an independent subject. Nobody does seerah in a madrasa as an independent subject. You read it yourself, but it's intertwined with the sunnah. Imam Muhammad rahimahullah, he started writing the maghazi, and he started writing the seerah, Seerah Saghir and Seerah Kabir. It's all maghazi. Right? It's about taxation, about kharaj, and about amwar. It's about how to treat the dhimmi and how to engage in warfare and battle, and how to do ghanima, taqsim al ghanaim. That's in the seerah. So we never, so that means that we did not include any popular discipline in popular Islam as part of the Islamic studies curriculum. We were very organized. Likewise, when you say you want to change the curriculum, which part of the curriculum of Islamic studies do you want to change? So we want to add on, but that's not changing. Okay? That's contextualizing the alim so that he has extra tools. It's part of maybe the takmeel, at the most English thing. But you can't change the curriculum. So ilmul kalam was always necessary for the ummah to develop and to read and to write and to inshallah teach, so that the alim now is a wholesome alim, and he can talk about Islam intellectually as a hujjah in front of other people. A necessary defense tool. It's a tool so you defend Islam against atheism, against I don't know whatever isms there are there, right? Postmodernism. There's another very unique bid'ah where nothing matters now. There's no gauge. There's no standard of how to read a text. Where you say that you people, you decide these are the usul. So now we're saying the usul are bogus. The postmodernists will say the usul are bogus. We don't need usul. We can read the way we want to read it. So everybody's interpretation is valid. No, right? So that's another one. But you have to know this. This is how these people think, and this is how they plan their country, and this is how they plan their policies, and this is how they come to terms with their regulations and everything else. This is how they think. This is the kufr. So you must have some understanding of that process, so that will only be through ilmul kalam. Ilmul kalam is vast. Now later on, like Razi, and they started now talking about physics also. Right? Ma wara tabi'at, and they talk about tabi'at and tabai and alam al-mawalid and all of that good stuff. They brought in atomism, and that was all difa'ad. But it's based on reading the philosopher. If you read Shah Waliullah rahmatullah and his students and his sons like Shah Abdul Aziz and Shah Rafiuddin and Shah Ismail Shahid, they read everything under the sun. Shah Rafiuddin has a book, it's called Damaghul Batil. Damaghul Batil is a very unique book in Ilmul Kalam. Shah Rafiuddin rahmatullah, he wrote in defense of the theory of Wahd al-Wujud. But in that book, he quotes Socrates, he's quoting Plato, and he's quoting Aristotle, he's quoting Ibn Sirin, and he's quoting Mullah Sadr. All of that. Some of them are Shia, some of them Ibn Sina is Ismaili. So there's nothing in popular Islam. In popular Islam, Ibn Sina is a hero. The best Muslim physician ever. We in Aqidah say, we're not sure he's Muslim. But that's in the madrasa. You can't say that from the mimbar, otherwise people will kill you, and they should. You must mix the two very different disciplines. There's some points you can inform people, some points just be quiet. Why? Because at least we have that bragging right about Ibn Sina. Okay, he has some attachment to Islam. Some attachment is better than no attachment, right? But there's that. So Aqaid, he was a mutakallim, and he was also a scientist. He was also a physician. He was a doctor. He wrote his book Qanun on the various forms of shifa, mashallah. They use it in Europe for centuries. It was part of the French university curriculum to teach Qanun for their physicians. So, but mind-boggling work, but his Kalam was no good, like Farabi, who came before him, right? Seerah's philosophy is based on Farabi and Al-Kindi and the philosophers who came before them. But you must read them, right? Especially post-graduation. Post-graduation, you have to read everybody. In Darul Deoband or Sajida, one student went to Maulana Salim, rahimahullah, and said, Hazrat, ये जो मौदूदी है ना, उनकी किताब पढ़नी चाहिए. जैसे मियाँ, अगर आपका इल्म आपके अंदर ठोस नहीं है तो आप ना पढ़िए, लेकिन आपको अपने इल्म पर भरोसा है तो आप जरूर पढ़िए. When you're not confident about yourself, then you shouldn't read anything. Just the Quran and Tilawat. Don't even read Hidayah, because you're not confident. Some of the ulama, they come and say, Hidayah is all against Hadith. And look at why is that? What have you studied? Didn't your Shaykh Hadith in Bukhari break down Imam Bukhari and just bulldoze him? No? When you read Anwar Shah Kashmiri and how he handles now Ibn Hajar, against all the accusations Ibn Hajar has against Imam Bukhari and not Imam Abu Hanifa. So they take them to task, they rip them apart. One of the reasons we study Bukhari is that we now understand where Hidayah comes in the Nisab. Hidayah comes in the Nisab before you study Bukhari. Why? Because we need to know the madhab first. We need to know the madhab first. After we've understood the madhab, we read Bukhari to see the other side. So Imam Bukhari's reading is very different from Abu Hanifa's reading. So it's a comparison between the Hanafi madhab and Imam Bukhari. That's how the Nisab is built. You understand? Why don't you study Bukhari in third year? Why do you study the last? You understand? Why do you study Tirmidhi last? Tirmidhi and Bukhari, obviously, and Abu Dawud, they all go together. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that when you don't know how the Islamic sciences work, then you'll get into a mess. In the Asal Dars Nizami, Mullah Nizam, there was no Bukhari. Right? In the Mughal classification of ulum, you had just Hidayah, Jalalain, Sharia Qaid, Mullah Jami, and the Alat, the Maqulat, and the Funun. There was no Bukhari. There was no Muslim. You did it yourself. You understand? But then they would give you the sanad of an alim. Because you should be able to handle Bukhari through your alat and your funun, right, and your hidayah. You should say that this is our madhab. We're not taking your opinion over the madhab. That's not working, because we are the government. We are the Mughals. We're the government. Okay? We rule according to Hanafi fiqh. Imam Bukhari doesn't have a madhab that is preserved. Imam Bukhari's madhab is not preserved, it's not documented. Abu Hanifa, subhanAllah, most documented madhab. So we rule the government according to Hanafi madhab, not according to Imam Bukhari's hadith. So you should be able to handle that. But then Shah Waliullah Rahmah came in and he added Bukhari, Muslim, and Tirmidhi, and Sihah Sittah. We're not too happy with him. But he did us a great favor, because then we were able to compare the Hanafi madhab with Imam Bukhari's position. So it's a comparison, it's a comparative study of two very different madhabain. That's the theory and philosophy of reading Bukhari and Tirmidhi and Abu Dawud. Nothing else. Right? That's the only reason. Now you became Shaykh al-Hadith, which is great, alhamdulillah, and that's fine. Imam Bukhari, as I said yesterday. He's a giant, mashallah, he's a wali of Allah. And we don't have any reservations about his knowledge. We're just saying that you don't mess with Abu Hanifa. He came before you. He's a tabi. So he's better in terms of khairul qurun. He's part of the khairul qurun. Whereas you're not. You're after tabi. And so on. So that is not. So you need to read everybody. So just as in the madrasa, you read every muhaddith. And you read the da'if ahadith. And you read the mawdu hadith also in Ibn Majah. They say there's a mawdu hadith in Muslim Sharif also. Right? But you read them. Why do you read mawdu hadith? So that's the same theory we have when you say we must read kufr. Right? So these were giant thinkers. That Shah Waliullah rahimahullah, he was so pragmatic that Shah Abdul Aziz says, Shah Waliullah would teach us the Bible sabaqan sabaqan. He would sit down with us and teach us the Bible sabaqan sabaqan. Every chapter he would teach us. Now who does that? No? No, yeah, the Bible. If you have a Bible in your library, kufr kahan se aa gaya? So that's popular Islam. I wouldn't tell any Awami to read the Bible. But I would tell you that maybe you should study the Bible from the Christian source, not your own source. Allama Khalid Mahmood rahimahullah studied the Bible. He said to the ulama of Britain, you should go door to door and tell every Christian this is the Bible and these are these mistakes in your Bible. Point them out. Go to them, make them open their doors and tell them. This is all kufr. He had a plan, it didn't work out because the ulama didn't support him. They're too scared, everybody's scared. Wujurat nahi rahi. But last time said that in that book, Dabaqul Batil, he quotes everybody under the sun. The Greek philosophers, the Muslim philosophers, the Ibn Sina, and he quotes even the Shias. Shah Abdul Aziz rahimahullah wrote Tuhfa Ithna Ashariya. You know the beauty of that book? What's the beauty of that book? The beauty of that book is that he only quotes Shia sources. In the whole entire book, this thick book, Tuhfa Ithna Ashariya, he's quoting Shia sources. Right? Meaning he studied the Shia sources. So that's the best way to defend or to, what do you call it? Reject an opinion, you quote them. So in the issue of evolution, you quote them and say, they're not on the same page. The scientists are not on the same page when it comes to evolution. So until you get your act together, I'm not talking to you. You disagree. So if you disagree, why can't I disagree? Right? That's the jawab you should have, Islamic jawab. Sometimes Islamic jawabs are better than tahqiqi jawabs because you have to shut them up. Right? So if you go to a scientist, I don't agree with Darwin. And my understanding of evolution is very different from this one and this one and this one. Right? So they have so much ikhtilaf within themselves that you don't need to do anything. Just say that, are you guys on the same page? Is this a theory or is this a fact? If it's a theory, then say it's just a theory. Prove to me it's the fact. Right? Yeah, so that's, I think, the way forward, that ilmul kalam is indispensable for the alim in a non-Muslim country. Abu Hanifa rahimahullah started fighting the Ashab al-Bidah. In his time, the Jabariya, the Qadariya, he also debated the atheists of his time, right? How did he defend the atheists? When you say atheism is a new thing, it's not a new thing. It's almost as old as time itself. The Quran talks about وَمَا يُهْلِكُنَا إِلَّا الدَّهْرِ. So you read the tafsir of that through the ulama who write tafsir, you will find a lot of information. So it's not just as the modern day atheism is any different from old age atheism, it's the same thing, basically, but you just have to wrap it in the modern wording. So that you need the modern language, the language of the time, of the colleges, universities, then you can do that. Then it's much easier for them to understand what is you do. In our promotion of Dar al-Qasim, there was the what do you call it? A discussion we had with some of the parents. They say, yeah, madrasa mein 6-7 saal lagana mushkil baat hai. Obviously, they're all hypocrites because they send their kids to college university for 6-7 years, 12 years to be a doctor, 10 years to be a lawyer. They don't have a problem there. So I said, okay, let me do this. I said, we're going to do now a 4-year bachelor's program, and a 2-year master's program, and a 1-year fellowship. Ye theek hai. The stupidity of the non-ulama, because they like the language. Bachelor, master's, mashallah, and fellowship, then the game's over. It's the same thing. So you need to know how to wrap and present. You know the wrapping on a gift? Everybody, they invest in the wrapping and the ribbon, sometimes a balloon and a card with it too. And the gift will be this small. It'll be a $5 gift with $10 wrapping. That's what you should do. Wrap it in the language they understand. And there's a little taqribi. You have to make it closer for them so that they come to yassiru. Make it easy for them to come to you. And so use that kind of language so that people realize, oh, when you say bachelor, so Maulana, he's in touch with reality. He says bachelors, he says masters, it's a PhD. And then on top of that, if you say that I have PhD students, that's it, finished, khalas. You're now the Imam of the Ummah. Right? Where the PhD might be a PhD in engineering. What does he know about Islam? Nothing. But he's a PhD. But if I have a PhD in Islamic, it's not good. Islamic studies and PhD don't go together anyway. Right? Especially if you're learning from an Orientalist. There's no Islam there. So Ilmul Kalam is very necessary, and the question you had of consciousness is a difficult issue in terms of understanding what we call neurology, right? Where they have all these experiments and they wire people up and see where does consciousness start, are human beings nothing except consciousness and being aware, and where do the emotions lie? Do the emotions lie in the heart, or the emotions are they a function of the brain, and where do these things come up, and what is the metaphysics that Islam brings to the table? People have written certain books on it. MashaAllah, you know Human, right? Yeah. So Human and Maulana Bilal, they've written a book on this subject. I'll get you the title. You can read about it. Inshallah, there are some things missing in that structure in the organization. But anyway, it's a good book. MashaAllah, alhamdulillah. So the idea is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does talk about these things. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَذِكْرَى لِمَنْ كَانَ لَهُ قَلْبٌ أَوْ أَلْقَى السَّمْعَ وَهُوَ شَهِيدٌ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ فَزَادَهُمُ اللَّهُ مَرَضًا فإن لا تعمل الأبصار ولكن تعمل القلوب التي في الصدور وجعل لهم والله أخرجكم من بطون أمهاتكم لا تعلمون شيئا وجعل لكم السمع والأبصار والأفئدة لعلكم تشكرون. Those discussions are there. Qari Tayyib rahimahullah had a wonderful taqreer on this ayah in Surah Nahl, where he brought out these ideas of Asbabul Ilm, which is in your Aqidah Nasafiyya, Asbabul Ilm Thalatha. And then the Sufis then did tremendous work on these issues, where they brought in a lot of terminology to help at least metaphysically understand. Modern day understanding is based on empirical science, as you know, is testing, collecting data, evaluating, analyzing data, the empirical method of knowing and formulating a hypothesis and a theory, and then you do more testing to find out whether it's a fact or not. So there's still testing. The state of awareness in sleep. So you have sleep labs everywhere in hospitals and private clinics, and they evaluate what is the sleep cycle and what they call the REM, rapid eye movement, and when do you dream, and how psychiatrists understand all of this process of dreaming, starting from obviously Freud, who's a pioneer in the field, but he's just a khabith person. Unfortunately, you have to read him. As much as a khabith is, you need to read him to understand what they think about dreams and so on. So we have dreams. Ibn Sirin, rahimahullah, the master of dream interpretation, the Quran speaks about the dreams of Yusuf alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam, and the Prophet's dreams and all that. So that science there needs to be, I think, organized for the Muslim student. But it must be post-graduation. Don't do it before you have your Khatm al-Bukhari. Do it afterwards, otherwise you'll get into a mess. Study that, all of them. Organize those ayat in your minds, and you'll see that there are basically, there's the aql, which we would call the brain, and there is now the nafs, there's the ruh, and there's the qalb. So there are basically 4 faculties that the Quran and Sunnah, they talk about. One added faculty is the afidah, which is mentioned, as that ayah and other ayahs. The fuad is also mentioned. So I think these terms, you need to map out the metaphysical universe of the mind and the heart and the nafs, basically. So you have nafs, and then you have different types of nufus. You have nafs nutqiyya, nafs kulliyya, and all of that. Then obviously, then you can have readings of Ibn Sina, who's written about it. He's actually quite okay in that field. He's done some work on that, and then you have Razi, who's worked on this. Imam Ghazali has a map of the inner self. Imam Ghazali has a chart, he has a map, he has a diagram of where the aql is, where the ruh is, where the nafs is, and where the qalb is, and so on. For Imam Ghazali, the aql and the qalb are the same thing. He believes they're synonymous. It's the same thing. For him, we don't. He says a bit more nuance than that because they're 2 different words. Yeah, so now, fil jasad al-mudghah, that hadith talks about ala wa hiya al-qalb. So that's qalb there. So what does that hadith mean in terms of not just science and medicine, but also in terms of metaphysics? Ma warat tabiyat. What does it mean for us to say that the emotions are in the qalb and so on? In your Nahu you have af'al al-qulub. So Nahwiyun actually touched upon it. These af'al al-qulub. Why is it af'al al-qulub? Dhann. Why is dhanna af'al al-qulub? Because you need 2 maf'ul. That's not the reason. That's not what the reason. Wajh tasmiyah is different from the hukum. The hukum is that it needs 2 maf'ul. The wajh tasmiyah, why is it called af'al al-qulub? That's a different thing, because they understood poetry, right? And poets obviously always think from the emotions, right? They're hopeless romantics, the poets. If you have a problem with your wife or your lover, then you go into poetry, because that's the only thing you can fall back on. Because you're sad and you're miserable, so now you write poetry. So poetry comes out of misery. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ didn't need that misery. So وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ وَمَا يَنبَغِي لَهُ. The Quran is a shifa. It's not about misery. That's the same thing with music. The philosophy behind music being haram is that it just causes a lot of misery. And musicians become musicians because they're manic depressants. Right? And they eventually kill themselves. The proof's in the pudding. You want to be a musician, make sure you have a suicide note with you. It's not the same with the Quran. مَنْ لَمْ يَتَغَنَّ بِالْقُرْآنِ فَلَيْسَ مِنَّا. So these kind of psychological issues, psychiatric issues, issues of self-awareness, consciousness, and all that is a whole field that needs to be discussed and studied. and then represent it in front of Muslims first and then non-Muslims also. But we must speak about it. I tell my medical team, I want you to go into mainstream conferences and say, this is what we believe. The first I said, no, I want you to go, tell them this is Islamic theory of medicine. So they went, and they went to 2-3 conferences, mashallah, alhamdulillah. The audience was blown away because they never heard this. So we didn't know Muslims had a theory of medicine because we thought Muslims were terrorists. That's why I told you that you have to represent what Islam is. If you represent what Islam is, people will come to you. They'll respect you because you're showing them something which is good. Right? So I get them engaged in all these discussions, and it's coming along, mashallah. Hopefully we'll have one group here also for medical ethics. But that is not a done deal yet, that field, that science. So there's no qati, conclusion. It's still very dhanni. So I'll leave it at that. Okay. What is my opinion? You don't want to know my opinion. Not here anyway. Maybe in the bioethics class, inshallah. All right. Then the third question, which is the relationship between the asma, the sifat, and the dhat. So there are obviously several possible explanations. One is the Mu'tazili position, which is a position. You must not discard the Mu'tazili position ilman. Aqidatan, yes, he said the Aqidah is wrong. That's a done deal, right? So you can't get bogged down with that emotionally. They're wrong, they're bid'ah. Baba isko padho, samjho kya keh raha. Because they have a position based on ilm. It's not jahl. You know the understanding of aqlus salim? The understanding of aqlus salim is that you cannot commit a sin if you have aqlus salim. Now isn't that a great position? Right? The way they use the aql, we disagree. You can't use the aql this way, you can use the aql this way. But their opinion was, their point of view was that aqlus salim means that you cannot commit a sin if you have aqlus salim. Therefore they said anyone who commits a sin is not a Muslim because he doesn't have aqlus salim. That's an academic position, which I think if the ulama took this position, that you can't commit a sin because you have aql salim, they might get somewhere. The way they use the aql to interpret the Quran, that's wrong. But this position is phenomenal. I think it's revolutionary. That if you want the ummah to compete in goodness, then you must use that. That our aql will only allow us to do good things, not bad things, which is the meaning of aql. So I'm not saying that I'm vouching for their position. I'm just saying that understand their position. It's not based on jahl. It's based on ilm. So they had a thorough understanding of the Quran and Hadith, and they had a thorough understanding of the Lughah and the Balagha, as you know. So they were masters of Sarf and Nahw and Balagha and Ash'ar and all of that good stuff. Yeah. So that is the position of the Mu'tazili vis-a-vis the Asma and Sifat. They say the Sifat, the Haditha, although they are the same as the Dhat in one opinion. One of the opinions of Mu'tazila say this, and others say no. They Haditha, they don't really exist per se. They only come into existence when Allah needs to bring them into existence. Needs here means the irada. So they base their understanding on Tawheed, at-Tawheed al-Mahd, that you can't have any other entity with Allah because that's shirk. So if you say the Asma and Sifat are there with Allah, then for them it was shirk. So some of them, not all of them. The Mu'tazili, you must understand, as a point of ilm, they're not monolithic. All of them don't have the same opinion. You must remember this, that you have to be careful. Usually some of our authors, they just say, this is a Mu'tazili position. It's not a Mu'tazili position, it's one Mu'tazili's position. And that you will get from Tafsirah. In Tafsir Adillah, he will mention the Mu'tazili who has the position. And he also mentioned the Mu'tazili who has a different position. So that in terms of ilm, that's why you need to do the research and read properly the text that they have, so that you don't make inaccurate mistakes. Yeah. So in Mu'tazili, they're not the same. They're not on the same page on every issue. They have various opinions, and unfortunately, they become kind of فَتَفَرَّقَ بِكُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ, as the Quran says, that you'll become splinter groups. You won't have a monolithic understanding. The other position, obviously, of the Ash'ariyah, that the Ummahat al-Sifat, the La Ayn wa La Khair, they're neither part of the That, but they are part of the That. They coexist. The Ummahat al-Sifat, al-Hayat, al-Ilm, al-Sama' al-Basar, al-Qudra, al-Irada, al-Takallum, these are the Ummahat al-Sifat, which you probably did in Sharia Qaid, right? So they say these Ummahat al-Sifat, they are Qadima, and the other Sifat, they are Haditha. Okay, so the three positions. One is, do the Asma and Sifat, do they exist with Allah? Are they part of the That? So they say they are and they're not. Right? Well, you can study that and study all the ikhnafat and the various madhab in that too. Then the other is who are the Ummahat al-Sifat? So then there's 7 Ummahat al-Sifat. The other Sifat they say Haditha. Very similar to the Mu'tazili position, where they say they come into existence, Allah brings them into existence only when He wants to. Meaning He employs them when He wants to. Kind of very tricky. And then that's the Ash'ari position. The Maturidi position is somewhat similar, La Ayn wa La Ghair, but they add on one more sifa. In the Ummahat al-Sifat, they add the sifa of Takween. Then they say that all the other Asma and Sifat are in Takween. So then for them, the Sifat are then Qadima. Huh? So when you have Takween or Takhliq, then every other Sifa is there. And that's what Imam Tahawi says, مَا زَالَ خَالِقٌ مُنْذُ كَانَ, in his Aqidah Tahawiyah. He mentions this, what do you call it? The Sifat and the Sifa of Takween being essential part of the Sifat. Then if that is essential, then everything else now also become essential. There's a fourth position of the Sufiya where they say they are Ayn, almost close to some Mu'tazili position, where they're not separate from the That, they are the same as the That, and so on. So now, in terms of explaining this, maybe, although you cannot make qiyas from insan to the Khaliq, but Imam, what do you call it, Abu al-Ma'in Nasafi rahimahullah uses this method in Tafsirah, quoting the Mu'tazili position that you must now be able to compare the Sifat of Allah with the Sifat of Insan as a reflection. إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَلَقَ آدَمَ عَلَى صُورَتِهِ. So they're a bit more organized there. So in terms of a human being, then that's where maybe the Ash'ari position, in terms of representation, makes more sense. That how do you represent this? Insan can be a father, he can be a son, he can be a brother, he can be a husband, and so on. But these are idafat. So now these are i'tibarat and idafat. It's the same being, but when you have different idafat, i'tibarat, ta'alluqat they call it, then they will be i'tibaran different, but haqiqatan the same. So when the father, when the man is a father, he's the same being, right? But when you say he's a father, then the father is different from the son, even if he's the same person. And the brother is different from the father, even if he's the same person. And the husband is different, even though he's the same person. So you have these i'tibarat, idafiyat, and nasabiyat, they call them. So that's how you want to position yourself. But it's a discussion worth exploring further in the mutawwalat if you want to get into this ilm al-kalam stuff. If you don't like it, don't do it. it has been your mizaj to be philosophical. If you're not philosophical, just stay with the easy stuff. Stay with lugha or something. But he's also philosophical. Sometimes Mullah Jami is very philosophical. So what I'm saying is that you must understand all the positions before you talk about it. That's the meaning of ilm. So the ilm will be that you take care of all the jihad in the discussion. So that is how you develop your breadth in knowledge. That you need the wus'ah to say whose position is what. And if you don't do that through mutala, then obviously you're not really an alim. So you must be willing to do some mutala on every issue so that you get to the point where, and that's what they unfortunately, the universities, they make you do all this research. They make sure that every position is now at least researched. If you don't research the positions, then they won't really qualify you for anything. But that's the adab we always had. Okay? Our ulama always had that adab of tartib was a Muslim civilization of that, organizing ulum and then just categorizing ulum. And that's in the field of being a librarian. How you organize a library is based on subject matter. And it can be based on time, it can be based on the author. And so that's how the muhaddithin also wrote in a very organized way. That's fuqaha always write organized. Right? Imam Muhammad was the pioneer of organized writing. Everybody who came after Imam Muhammad followed his methodology. He is Sahib al-Kitab, basically. But you need that organization. So what we believe is that the Prophet Wahi organized him. That came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he was just innately organized. The Sahaba organized themselves through their fahm and nur from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Tabi'een, they also organized themselves. Dhawqan. Abu Hanifa doesn't have any written usul. Does he have a book on usul? No. But he's the most organized thinker of everybody. Why is he organized? He's dhawqan. That's from the nur and the barakah of the Tabi and the Sahaba. But then everybody else then documents their organization and thinking. But it has to be organized. The only way you can organize is if you have everything in that organization. So when you're talking about this masjid, Madinah Masjid, so when you talk about Madinah Masjid, you don't talk about the mimbar alone. You have to talk about the carpet, you have to talk about the pillars, you have to talk about the mezzanine there, you have to talk about the clock on the wall, you have to talk about the parking lot, you have to talk about the street, it's on the neighborhood. Then you can say, I'm now talking about Madinah Masjid. That's called the comprehensive understanding of one issue, just one issue. So there's a lot of work ulama have to do. They must spend time organizing their thoughts and then doing the research. It doesn't take that long. In fact, the writing has made it very easy. So now in the Hanafi madhab, if you're doing ifta, then the only way you can pass a fatwa is if you have read all the fatwa on that issue. Right? You know, Darum Zakaria ka fatwa dekh liya, Mufti Azhar Haq ka fatwa dekh liya, fatwa de diya. No. That's incompetence. That's naqs fil ilm. You can't do that. Then you're a cheat. You're deceiving people. You're not a mufti. You're just muft. Or muftin. Either one, or both. So you must be true and honest to the discipline. So if you're going to say something about something academically, even in madrasa, in a paper, research paper, then make sure you've covered all the angles. That will be the way forward for ulama. The ulama must have the shawq to do this kind of work. Yeah. So post-graduating, Maulana Salim, rahimahullah, used to say that when we give you ijazah, after Bukhari, we mean we give you ijazah now to study. अब आलिम बनने की इजाज़त है आपको, आलिम बने नहीं अभी, You see the thinking? It's very different. It's revolutionary thinking. अब तुम्हें इजाज़त है कि तुम आलिम बन सकते हो, मुताला की इजाज़त है, उससे पहले मुताला की भी इजाज़त नहीं. Right? Meaning that graduation means you've graduated into ilm, not from ilm. The graduation from ilm means you're done. And if you're done, you're done. Then you're just a bewakoof. You're no good for anybody. But if you're graduating into ilm, then you may do some work and some khidmah. So that's lifelong. Right? Lifelong until you die. You don't graduate from ilm. So قُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي علما. That's حتى يأتيك اليقين. يعني موت. Right? So until death, you have to keep on studying. لغيره. And when Allah Khalid Mahmud rahimahullah used to come and visit myself in my house, then I took him upstairs, and apparently there was no real book that he liked in that room. There weren't too many books in that room. My other books were in another room. But he picked up one book by Mullah Jami on क्या नाम है उसका, on the awliya. He has a fairness of the all awliya Mullah Jamis. He picked up that book and he started reading. I mean, the Shaykh, he's Allama Khalid Mahmud, 85 years old when he came that time. He died at 98, I think, mashallah. But when he came to my house the first time, he was like 85, 87. And I see this old man picking up a book, which I probably didn't know existed there. He's reading. Yeah. So that's the caliber of Shaykh you must have for ilm. Yeah. So Qayyad Tayyib Rahimahullah, when he came to England, to Gloucester, where I used to live, the Khadim says I had a book in the bedroom next to his bed. I didn't know he was there. And Qayyad Tayyib says I was doing his khidmah, massage. So I kept on massaging him as he was there on the bed. He saw the book, so he picked up the book. And he says he didn't stop reading until Fajr. He says for 4 hours, summertime, yeah? Fajr, Isha is late, Fajr is early. I kept on massaging, हाथ थक गए, वो पढ़ते रहे. You understand? Yeah. So you never graduate from ilm, you graduate into ilm. Yeah, so that's the philosophy you should have. If you have this philosophy, you'll do good work, inshallah, bi'idhnillah. Allah give you all barakah and success and qabul, inshallah. A few minutes for questions. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you can have the pedagogy. You can have Tahawiyah in early days and Badal Mali, Bidayah. You cover all 4 years, inshallah. Badal Mali with a Sharah. Yeah. It just develops your understanding better than your concrete. By the time you get to Shariah, you know the mubahith. Like in Hidayah, before Hidayah, you do Quduri, Shariah. So now you know the mubahith. And Hidayah gives you the finishing touches of what we call Hanafi Islamic law. Any other question? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned that. Make it easier for them. Don't be translating that literally. Explain that this is how we see Allah. Allah has now essence and He has names, attributes. So we must understand that basically they're almost the same. He is the same being, he's the same person. I'll give the example of the man who's the father, husband, son, and brother. That's a good example for them. John. Anything more technical, if they ask, say, come and see me later. Oh, are there sisters here? No. They can text too, if they have questions. Which one? Hmm. That is one of the problems of reading authors who write many books. Ibn Taymiyyah is, I think, the most classic example of conflicting opinions everywhere. In one book he says one thing, in another book says something very opposite, different. And I think that he's following the Imam of his madhab, the Imam Ahmad, always has two riwayah, one jawaz, one not jawaz. If it's a Sahabi who did this and a Sahabi who did that, he says fine, mashi, follow each, any of the opinion. So Ibn Taymiyyah and other writers, they have to be understood in the whole context of their scholarship. So that's why it's difficult to read Ibn Taymiyyah in terms of his Aqidah. He has so many conflicting opinions. In terms of his hadith, it's fine. I think most of his opinions are almost the same everywhere. Imam Ghazali is another example. Which book did he write first and which book was his last work? So that in some of the juziyat, he brings out there might be some, not very many, conflicting opinions, but he doesn't have that many. He's very scientific, he's very organized. Shah Walillah, another example, if you read his books based on Kashf, then I suggest you don't read them. Don't use his books on Kashf. You can read Al-Fawz al-Kabir, very terse book, organized, systematic, wonderful understanding of the Quran or Surah Tafsir, which I don't know if you have that in your curriculum or not, but it's a wonderful book to actually study and find. Hujjatullah is somewhat contentious that Shaykh Yunus, rahimullah, I heard from his student Mawlana Rahman that he said that there are places there where Shah Waliullah was correcting his ibara in places, but he didn't do it. So the printer, the publisher, compiler, just wrote down what he saw in the Muswadda, in the original manuscript, word for word, but it's probably not the final opinion. Some passages, not all of them. But Hujjatullah on the whole is very organized, systematic. Most of it is good, except fiqh. We don't take his fiqh from him. Qari Tayyib Sahib rahimahullah went to Mawlana Thanwi and asked him if he could teach Hujjatullah in Darul Deoband. He said, हाँ वो ठीक है लेकिन उनसे फ़िक़ह नहीं लेना. ऐसे वो किताब बहुत अच्छी है लेकिन फ़िक़ह में उनकी बात नहीं सुनना. So that maybe you need some guided reading. So the Kibar ulama, the senior ulama will teach you how to read certain books. It's a methodology and so on. So Shah Waliullah's Tasawwuf, unless you have a sheikh, don't read his books by yourself. Unless the sheikh is there in front of you, then you can tell the sheikh, this is what I understand, is this right or wrong? So then he'll make you Islam. And so on. So authors who write many books, they're somewhat difficult to ascertain what is their final opinion. Mawlana Thani Rahmatullah has many books, but all his books are standard. They're all the same. You won't have any problem reading any of his books except what I mentioned yesterday. One is Islahi and the other is Ilmi. So you mustn't treat his Islahi books as Ilmi books. And you mustn't treat his Ilmi books as Islahi books. The Bayan al-Quran is Ilmi and all of that good stuff. You mustn't treat that book like any other, the wa'az he gave. So the wa'az is for the awam. So there you mustn't establish ilm based on the Islahi books. You must establish ilm only from the ilmi books. So there are methodologies of how to read, which is another science in itself. How do you read? So every author will bring to the table whatever he brings. Ibn Hajar, one of the problems of Ibn Hajar, you know how many years he took to write that Sharah? How many years did it take? Anyone know? He took 16 years to write the Sharah. So there's no way that his last opinion, the first opinion, will be the same. Because you do evolve as you grow older, and you have different takes on Masail and so on. So there, if he did a tanqih of his own work, then it's fine. But I don't know whether he did that or not. But again, he's amazing. You should read him. So that was some of the issues that they took their time to write. Suyuti is another one. Mikthar, he wrote on every subject under the sun. But he's standard. You won't find any discrepancy there. He has never changed his opinion, as far as I know, in his writing. So the writing with a standard approach is difficult. But that's why you don't want to start writing when you're 30 years old. Start writing when you're 50 years old. So you're not going to be changing your opinions all the time. Yeah. But you need a command over the subject. That's the key. Do I command this masala? Just one masala. Then your dhawq and shawq will develop, inshallah. Should be a passion. Yes.
In the same, for example, are predicated of the divine essence. What's the nature of this predication? Is it analogical in its nature, or is it equivocal? Is it ishtirak?
Why is it ishtirak? There's no ishtirak there. It's kind of tamtheel more than anything else. So you said for the sake of example, that we are saying this. There's no correspondence. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. So you can't do that. There's no qiyas there. So everything that the mutakallimun say about Allah, it is not chronological, it's logical. Meaning there's no chronology, there's no time there. The first Allah has irada, then his irada has ta'alluq with his qudra, and when the qudra comes, then he has ilm, and sama and basar, ilm comes first. So there's no chronology there, it's all instant. It's the same thing. So mutakallimun, they explain it in terms of logical understanding. Hence the mantiq comes in. Muqaddimat, and all of that. So there you have to be careful you don't overdo it. Yeah, you must not compare insan with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Although, as I said, in Tafsirah, his methodology is this. Primarily because he's probably writing also for the Mu'tazili audience. Yeah, but there's no predication. There's no time. It's instant. In fact, even less than instant. وَمَا أَمْرُنَا إِلَّا كَوَاحِدَةٍ كَلَمْحٍ فِي الْبَصَرِ إِلَّا وَاحِدَةٌ كَلَمْحٍ فِي الْبَصَرِ. So in Lamh al-Basar, there's no time there. Even that is tamthili. It's not haqiqi. It's just Allah just using that as an example so that the Bedouin Arab can understand. It's a very, very short time. So these are kind of the Kalami discussions. But when you speak into the awamis, it just happens instantaneously. So all of these sifat, they exist, they coexist, and they come into play all the time because Allah's irada is azali and abadi both. Yeah, so He's always making irada. Fa'alun lima yurid. The fa'al is ism mubalagha. You're always constantly engaged, doing things. Any other questions? Bismillah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. باب في الرجل يسب الدهر. وبه قال حدثنا محمد بن الصباح بن سفيان وابن الشرحي قال حدثنا سفيان عن الزهري عن سعيد عن ابي هريره رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يؤذيني ابن ادم يسب الدهر وانا الدهر بيدي الامر اقلب الليل والنهار. قال ابن الصرحي عن ابن المسيب مكان سعيد.
باب في الرجل يسب الدهر. وبه قال حدثنا محمد بن الصباح بن سفيان وابن السرحي قال حدثنا سفيان عن الزهري عن سعيد عن ابي هريره رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: يؤذيني ابن ادم يسب الدهر وانا الدهر بيدي الامر اقلب الليل والنهار. قال ابن السرحي عن ابن المسيب مكان سعيد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. باب في الرجل يسب الدهر. به قال حدثنا محمد بن الصباح بن سفيان وابن الصرح قال حدثنا سفيان عن الزهري عن سعيد عن ابي هريره رضي الله عنه قال عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: يؤذيني ابن ادم يسب الدهر وانا الدهر بيدي الامر اقلب الليل والنهار. قال ابن الصرح عن ابن المسيب مكان سعيد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. باب في الرجل يسب الدهر. به قال حدثنا محمد بن الصباح بن وفي قال حدثنا محمد بن الصباح بن سفيان وابن السرح قال حدثنا سفيان عن الزهري عن سعيد بن ابي هريره رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: يؤذيني ابن ادم يسب الدهر وانا الدهر بيدي الامر يقلب الليل والنهار. قال ابن السرح عن ابن المسيب مكان سعيد. باب في الرجل يسب الدهر. قال حدثنا محمد بن الصباح بن سفيان وابن السرح قال حدثنا سفيان عن الزهري عن سعيد عن ابي هريره رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: يؤذيني ابن ادم يسب الدهر وانا الدهر بيدي الامر واقلب الليل والنهار. قال ابن الصحيح عن ابن المسيب مكان سعيد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. This hadith is one of the most amazing hadith in terms of understanding time, al-dahr. It goes along with what I was saying earlier about the idea of time, the theory of time, the Aqidah of time in the Quran and Sunnah. So this hadith explains itself. يؤذيني ابن آدم يسب الدهر وأنا الدهر. That Ibn Adam, he hurts me by cursing time, and I am time. So the Prophet ﷺ, riwayatan an Rabbihi, he makes the sharh of this. Ana ad-dahru ay biyadi al-amr. أقلب الليل والنهار, that time is in my hands. Yes, I control time. I control the amr, the command, that I command time and I create time. So one time is now relative to this dunya. أقلب الليل والنهار, that's the 24 hours a day. And there's another time that is relative to other phenomena in the cosmos. Time on Mars will be different, a different standard. It probably takes much longer to orbit. Time on Venus and Mercury will be much shorter. And so this time in the dunya, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this is the micro. أُقَلِّبُ اللَّيْلَ وَالنَّهَارَ, I control, I change, I alternate day and night. So I control time here in this dunya. Then بِيَدِي الْأَمْرُ, that's the macro. The macro means time in general, outside of space. I also control because I have the amr. أَلَا لَهُ الْخَلْقُ وَالْأَمْرُ. So amr belongs to me. I control time. Time for us is controlled by Allah. It is also created. Okay. So then you have certain words in hadith and the Quran. One is asr. Asr is the nijoor of time, the nectar of time. As it declines, it's declining. As Pickthall says, declining time. It's a wonderful translation. Asr comes at the end of the day, when the sun is about to set. Then you have Zaman above, broader than Asr is Zaman. It's a much broader concept of time. Yeah. So that in the Zamana qad istadara wa raja'a ka hayyati yawmi khalqa Adam. That time. That time has now made a full circle. Istadara means to make a full circle as an orbit. The time when it orbits is going to come back to the same position that Allah created Adam alayhi salam, where the year is now 12 months. Okay, so that means time travels. It went through phases where the year was not 12 months, but now it is on this day of Hajj al-Akbar. It has now come back to its original position at the time of creation. So that's another theory Muslim scientists, physicists must look into. So that's now. Then above Zaman, this Dahr. Yeah. So Zaman might be somewhat almost infinite in the cosmos, even though they believe that it will come to some kind of standstill one day. They predict billions of years. How they do it, I don't know, but you can ask them. How they predict billions of years before the universe comes to its demise and so on. Above that, there's Dahr. Yeah. So Dahr will be very close to eternity. Some ulama say Dahr is one of the names of Allah. So they take this hadith as on the Zahir. They don't make ta'wil. But the hadith seems to be making the ta'wil for us. Biyadi al-amr, that's now the understanding of ana dahr. Dahr is in my hands, or I have command. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us a barakah and understanding of the hadith of Abi Dawud and also all the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inshallah ta'ala. Who are the people seeking ijazah? All of these? Anyone else? सब तुफैली तुफैली क्या मिलता है माँ बखियार माशाअल्लाह जज़ाकुमुल्लाह أنا أجيزكم إجازتي من قاري طيب رحمه الله، وهو قد استفاد إجازته من أنور شاه، وهو من محمود حسن شيخ الهند، وهو من مولانا قاسم، إلى شاه ولي الله الدهلوي. أنا أجيزكم هذه الإجازة إن شاء الله بفضل الله وبمنه وبكرمه وببركة سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. تقبل الله منا ومنكم. ما شاء الله. دعاء التي بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد عبده ورسوله. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. اللهم افتح لنا باب رحمتك. اللهم رب زدنا علما، اللهم رب زدنا علما، اللهم رب زدنا علما، اللهم وفقنا لما تحب وترضى، واجعل آخرتنا خيرا من الأولى. اللهم احسن عاقبتنا في الأمور كلها، وأجرنا من خزي الدنيا وعذاب القبر وعذاب الآخرة. رب يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير، وبك نستعين. الحمد لله وبنعمته تتم الصالحات. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وآله وأصحابه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. والحمد لله. جزاكم الله. السلام عليكم.